All of Unit 9 is about quadrilaterals. Quadrilaterals are defined as being four-sided polygons. We're going to be learning about 6 different types of quadrilaterals, and so today's notes are all about parallelograms. A parallelogram is defined as being a quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides parallel. Based on the definition of parallelogram, you can look in the picture here. The first properties of parallelograms that are true are both pairs of opposite sides are parallel to one another. Remember, parallel means that they don't intersect. We also have that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, so that means that these two sides are the same length, and then it means that these two sides are the same length. Both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, so these two angles are equal to each other, and then these two angles are equal to each other. The fourth one is both pairs of consecutive angles are supplementary. So that means that the ones, not the ones that are across from each other, but the ones that are next to each other, those ones add up to 180 degrees. Remember, that's what supplementary means. And then the last one is that the diagonals bisect each other. Diagonals go across the shape, so it's not one of the sides of the parallelogram. They're the ones that go across the shape, and the diagonals bisect each other. So this one gets cut in half, and then this one gets cut in half. The diagonals aren't equal to each other, and they don't intersect any way special here in the middle, but they do cut each other in half. We can use the properties of parallelograms to set up equations to help us solve for missing things inside the shapes. So if you look here at number 1, the 5x plus 19 and the 7x are on opposite sides, and as we set up above, the opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent to each other. So I can set an equation up, and I can set 7x equal to 5x plus 19, and I can use that to solve for x. And so solving that for x will give me x equals 9.5. Similarly, I can look back at the picture, and angle B and angle D are across from each other. You see how they're on the opposite sides of the parallelogram? That's what lets me know that I can set those equal to each other, because up above it said in the third one down that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. And so I can set those two angles equal to each other because they're opposite in the picture, and I can solve for y. And so when you go through and you solve for y, for this one you'll get y equals 11. So x is 9.5 and y is 11. On this question, there's one other thing that you're being asked to find. It also wants you to figure out how long is the segment from A to D. Remember that I recommended previously A to D, be careful, it's not this one, that's angle D. It's this one right here. So to answer the last part of this question, I'll do the work for it right over here underneath the picture. What you're going to do is you're going to say from A to D is equal to 7 times, and then you have to put the number that you're going to go ahead and multiply that by. It's important that you see right there that you're going to plug in the x, you're not going to plug in the y. And so when you multiply these values together, you'll get AD is equal to 66.5. So that's the length of that segment that you're trying to finish up and find right there. So when you're doing these problems, it's given that it's a parallelogram that's implied by the directions on the other page. It wants us to find the values of x and y. So you want to look at the picture, and you also want to refer back to the other page of the notes that talks about those 5 properties of parallelograms. In this one, angle D and angle B are across from each other, and so those are opposite angles, and the properties of parallelograms say that opposite angles are congruent to each other, so we'll create that equation. 10x minus 19 is equal to 9x minus 5, and then we'll solve that equation for x. And solving that equation for x, we get x equals 14. Again, the reason why I set these two equal to each other is because they were opposite angles, and the opposite angles are congruent to each other. To solve for y, you want to look and see what's labeled with y's. So this side and this side are both labeled with y's. Side AD and side BC are opposite sides, and from the properties list on the previous page in your notes, you know that opposite sides are congruent. So you'll set up an equation setting those equal to each other. So let's see, 3y minus 1 is equal to y plus 15, and then you'll go through and solve that for y to solve for y. Solving this one for y gives you y equals 8. So x equals 14 and y equals 8. Those are 2 of your answers to the question. The final thing that this question is asking you to do is solve to figure out the measure of angle A. And it's important that you notice up on the picture that angle A is one of the angles that isn't marked. So we'll have to do this one a little bit differently. You can use either angle D or angle B to help you do this problem. It doesn't matter which one you want to pick. You can't plug the 14 or the 8 in for angle A because that's not a marked angle, so you don't know how big that one is. But here's what I can do. I can say the measure of angle B, which is not the answer for the question that I'm trying to get, is equal to 9 times, and then you plug in the 14 here for x, minus 5. I'm going to solve to figure out how big the measure of angle B is, and then from there I can use subtraction to figure out the measure of angle A. Since they're consecutive, they're next to each other, so we know that they're supplementary. Multiplying together 9 and 14 gives me 126, and so I'll get the measure of angle B is equal to 121 degrees, but that's not the answer to the question. I'm trying to figure out how big the measure of angle A is, and so angle A and angle B are supplementary. And you'll remember from previous lessons that supplementary means that they add up to 180 degrees. So to figure out how big the measure of angle A is, which is what I'm trying to solve for on this one, I'm going to do 180, take away 121. And so when I do that subtraction, 180 take away 121 gives me 59 degrees, and so that's the final answer to the question that they're looking for. If we were solving for the measure of angle B or D, we would have just had to plug it in, and that would have been our answer. But because we were solving for one of the consecutive angles, or the angles that are next to each other, that's how I knew that I had to subtract it from 180. In the final example on the notes for 9.1, you want to look and see what information is marked for you on the picture. So side EH and side FG are opposite sides, so to solve for those, we're going to set them equal to each other because in a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. And so for this one, that's going to be 5z minus 16 is equal to 3z plus 8. We're setting them equal to each other because we know it's a parallelogram, and then we can use that property of parallelograms, that opposite sides are congruent to each other, to solve for z. When I go through and solve for z on this one, I'll get z equals 12, so that'll be one of my answers to the question. The next thing I need to solve for is w, and see how these are pointing. They're pointing at this piece of the diagonal and this piece of the diagonal. We have to use the fifth property that we wrote down on the other side of the notes page for today, which says that in a parallelogram, the diagonals bisect each other. Bisect means they cut each other in half. So we know that 4w plus 4 is equal to 2w plus 22, and we can use that equation, because again the diagonals bisect each other, to go through and to solve to figure out what w is equal to. And so solving for w here gives you w equals 9 as the second answer that the question's looking for. The last part of this question wants us to figure out how long is it from E to G, and so coming over here and looking at the picture, from E to G is this whole diagonal. We'll need to take the number, the answer that we got for w here, we'll need to plug it in for this part, and we'll need to plug it in for this part, and then we'll add both pieces together. And so that's what we've gone ahead and done here. We took the 9 that we got for w, and the first thing we did was we plugged it in from E to J. So 4 times 9 plus 4 gives you 36 plus 4, which gives us 40. And then, once we were done with that, we plugged it in from J to G. So it was 2 times 9 plus 22, which gave us 18 plus 22, which gave us 40. To find the answer from E to G, we need to take the 40 that we got from E to J and the 40 that we got from J to G, and we're going to add them up together. So my answer for EG, for how long that segment is right there, it's 80 for that one, because half was 40, and we added them together to get 80.